Cisco ISE relies on various identity sources to validate credentials and to check various user or endpoint attributes. Cisco ISE supports internal identity sources, one of which is the user identity information, which can include a username, password, email address, account description, associated administrative group, user group, and role. The other internal source is the endpoint information for wired, wireless, and VPN-connected devices, which are represented by their MAC address. This may also store other endpoint attributes, such as platform and OS version. Cisco ISE also supports several external identity sources, as you see here. We'll talk about these soon, but first, I want to tell you a bit more about internal identity sources. Now, this offers a simple way to provision users and endpoints locally on Cisco ISE without need for external identity servers. Now, this is great for test beds, temporary installations, and maybe very small deployments. The local database of users and device endpoints is maintained on the primary admin node, which synchronizes to the secondary admin node and all policy service nodes. For easier management of accounts, assign users and endpoints to identity groups. User accounts have a set of attributes, including a mandatory password. Some protocols like EAP-TLS or PEAP-TLS do not use password-based authentication, and so the internal database does not work with these protocols. And remember, the internal database can include device endpoints, identified by their MAC address. This is used for MAC Authentication Bypass, or MAB, which requires you to define endpoints and identify them by their device MAC addresses. Okay, let's look at external identity sources, which provide a scalable, redundant authentication framework. Clients can authenticate against a single authentication source or a sequence of multiple authentication sources. Let's take a look at how Cisco ISE can work with these external identity sources, starting with the Microsoft Active Directory. Active Directory is the most widely deployed directory service in the world, where you can assign permissions to users, network devices, and object groups. It is a hierarchical repository for network user and device information. A forest at the top level contains one or more trees. A tree is a collection of domains that share trust relationships. A domain is a grouping of objects that share the same database, logically grouped as organizational units, or OUs. Now, these OUs can mimic your corporate structure: a sales OU, an accounting OU, and an engineering OU. Or they can group server objects in a cluster, or printers on the same floor, whatever you need. Each server, printer, client PC, and user account is stored in the Active Directory as an object. Okay, now all common authentication methods are supported. The most common include EAP-TLS, PEAP MS-CHAP v2, and EAP-FAST, but many others are available. These authentication methods use some combination of username password with client and/or server-side certificates. Cisco ISE retrieves these certificates and validates credentials to verify a user or machine identity. Also, Cisco ISE supports integration with multiple Active Directory domains without requiring you to establish trust relationships between these domains. You can connect up to 50 join points or independent connections to a specific AD server. Now, regardless of how many servers you connect to, you may occasionally have issues with ambiguous Active Directory credential formats. Now, this can be resolved with the Cisco ISE Identity Rewrite feature. This allows Cisco ISE to modify the username for an incoming request and send it to Active Directory in a required format. For example, Cisco ISE receives an authentication request from the username in this format and rewrites it to this format. Now, there are many possibilities for this rewrite feature. It can also rewrite identities and certificates and process requests that have incorrectly provisioned certificates. This is all based on identity rewrite rules, which you define in Cisco ISE. You should also be aware that every Cisco ISE node runs a diagnostic tool to automatically test and diagnose the AD deployment. You can execute tests to detect issues that may cause functionality or performance failures.